It is Wednesday, 14th of October. Welcome to the shortlist. I'm your host, Johnny Campbell, CEO and co-founder of SocialTalent. Welcome back to our show. This show today, I'm really excited about as it's a topic I, in fact, first spoke about 3-4 years ago on a Disrupt HR stage in New York City. And I guess it's probably serendipitous that our guest joining us today is also currently based in New York City to continue that conversation in an environment in the world of talent where I think it's become even more present. And that is the kind of emergence of this bigger conversation around talent acquisition and going beyond talent acquisition to a much bigger talent conversation. Before we get into that though, just want to quickly remind those of you listening and viewing that you can catch all of the shortlist shows that we broadcast in the past. You can link to our podcast if you're not on the podcast, and you can get an agenda of what's coming up on our future shows by going to socialtalent.com/the shortlist. If you're listening live today, we'd really encourage your comments, your questions as well. So please do jump on the questions on either YouTube or LinkedIn, and we'd love to hear what you want to think for our guest today or get your comments for our guest today as well. Our guest today is Christoph Niebel. Christoph has joined Pontoon Solutions as the president of the organization quite recently. Pontoon, part of the Adecco Group, is a company that Christoph had previously worked for with Lee Hecht Harrison, which many of you may know, either the Lee Hecht brand or the Pontoon, and certainly the Adecco brand. If you're in any way working in the talent space, you're bound to know them. And he has a fascinating background, and I think a really, really interesting and unique perspective on this bigger picture of talent. It's unique, and I think brilliant to have somebody join such a powerhouse of an organization as Pontoon Solutions with such an interesting background and opinion to give us his background and explain why a man with a German accent with a hint of Australian is currently living in New York. Christoph, you might introduce yourself to our audience.
Johnny, thanks for having me. I quite enjoyed that. Where do I start after this? Let me tell you what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's probably a good place to start. My purpose is to help, businesses and people uncover, light up, and ignite potential. And you just mentioned my current and my last employer under the Adecco Group, Pontoon and LHH, and I've been incredibly lucky that both of those, allow me to bring my personal kind of why into the realm of work, basically much every day. And this has been now for 12 years or something with LHH, where I was an executive committee member, and now for the last 6 weeks as the president of Pontoon. As you said, I've operated in a few different places, currently live in New York, and beforehand 12 years in Australia, and then I'm German born, so operate across the world. And interestingly enough, the clients that sit in front of today, which are typically C-level HR and talent leaders, are very much the same that I said across over the 10 years across the world, and they have a very similar challenge. And they typically tell us that it's incredibly hard to change the makeup and skill sets of their people at the speed at which they need to drive their business strategy, at which the markets are being disrupted, or they need to capitalize on opportunity. And then, this is where we thought, how can we shape our business and set it up to increase that speed and to become a partner that can lead them really to growth as they navigate in these markets. And now in an enviable position at Pontoon to really be the architect of solutions with both the Adecco Group ecosystem as well as our external kind of partner. It's tech and supplier partnerships, and I'm pretty passionate about being agnostic from that mothership in that way. But it brings us benefits. So what do we really do to do all that? Is everything from upfront consulting and providing agility and workforce planning to managing extended and kind of contingent workforce. We manage about $12 billion in as an MSP, and close to 500,000 contractor starts each year. On the perm side, source more than 3 million candidates and place more than 100,000 a year through our RPO business, and then get the ability to morph this all together in some interesting solutions beyond acquisitions, incorporating upskilling, reskilling, internal and external mobility through sister companies such as GA and LHH, and of course external networks, and all that together, in a nutshell, is talent beyond acquisition. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of those practical ideas and learning from you too, Johnny. So thanks for having me.
And two things really stand out to me that I think make this hopefully a very interesting conversation, and I expect it will be, because we've spoken before, Kristoff, and I've been fascinated by your perspective. Because one, yes, you have that perspective of scale. You mentioned some of the stats that you've been involved in. The hiring and managing talent on that scale is rare. Not everyone has that perspective and be able to see that big picture across a global organization. But second of all is that I think uniquely you have really kind of gone through the full talent life cycle. Whereas many people in the talent acquisition space have just been involved in the attraction and hiring end of the talent lifecycle. You've also gone all the way through the end, which is where probably the LHH business sits more comfortably, which is the exit and kind of departure end, but everything in between. And I think that's the unique lens I'm hoping you can bring to this conversation. But before we get stuck into that, what I want to do is maybe start off with some really, I guess, timely and appropriate news stories that we found in the news this week. Niall, over to you. So first up, this comes from Forbes, Kristoff, and this article talks about how shaping the employee experience through your HR technology stack is super, super important. And it's written by, I believe, by a senior partner in EY in the US. And this, I guess, is tapping into a trend that, we know has been around for several years, the focus on the employee experience, which I guess is more of a category of a trend that incorporates a bunch of different elements. But this article is quite focused on the importance of tech to really drive that employee experience. Wanted to get your thoughts on this, and maybe you can give us your summary or your perspective of what you got from this article.
Yeah. Look, it resonates with me for a couple of reasons. Number one, now being in kind of my first CEO role and leading 2,000 people, I wake up every day thinking about the employee experience, and believe me, I think about this broader than just tech and the front end of the employee life cycle, because I now live it. Secondly, I'd say that at Pontoon, it's actually a real core value. Like, how do we bring in experience? And the last thing, but actually, I'd say here is that for me, tech is a tool. It serves an outcome, and it really needs to be contextualized to the environment, to the outcome. So I do think it has a huge impact on the employee experience. The question is, of course, does it simply have a positive one by bringing in more tech? And I, firmly disagree with that. It doesn't necessarily change it for the better. When I read this, it got me to think about how you solve for this. How do you ensure that you do this the right way? And I come back to a mental model that I've that I learned from Charlie Munger. You might know him as the long-term partner of Warren Buffett, certainly someone about 1 million times smarter than I am. And he talks about this principle of inversion, which basically most people will come and think through an idea forward, and they say, how can we use tech to do really cool things to increase the employee experience? And he argues that maybe a better way is or what you also should do, is think about it backwards and say, look, in how many ways could we use tech to actually worsen the employee experience, right? And ideally we avoid all those things, and that sounds really simple, but I bet you that each of our businesses has enough examples where we do these stupid things, every day, and actually through tech worsen it. And I keep going back to this mental model as an example, because in my experience, avoiding stupidity is easier than seeking brilliance. And I think this is a double-edged sword of tech. Sometimes we're throwing at it to improve something versus thinking, hey, can it actually make it worse? And so that is something that I kept thinking about when I was reading this.
Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me, that concept of inversion and doing it the wrong way around. Years and years ago, I remember being in a product meeting with our engineers, and we were talking about we need to put AI into our product. And I think this happens with folks in the people space. We need tech to solve this problem. I remember saying, but what problem are we solving? Like, Like, tell me the problem we're solving. Tell me how we're going to solve it. And then if AI can make that solution better, great. If tech can make that solution better, fantastic. But it really has to come from, is there an actual need for this? I remember I recently spoke with a vendor who showed me their solution, which again, AI powered, a self-serve chatbot for employees where they could deal with issues of confrontation in the workplace. So you have a disagreement or some sort of negative experience with another member of your team or your boss or subordinate, and you can talk to the chatbot and they'll advise you on your legal rights or give you some advice, et cetera, et cetera. And it was like, look, this is what we could do with technology. And I was like, my instinct was like, that's brilliant, that we should put that in. But then I paused and said, is that what the employees want? Is that what they're screaming out for? Is that the thing missing in their lives? Is that what's going to make their job better? And there is a danger, I think, in kind of going, hey, there's tech that can do that, let's buy it, as opposed to going, hang on a second, what do people actually want? What's the driver? And oftentimes, what people want is they want clarity, vision, they want autonomy, they want to understand what's happening. And, they're the basics that people want. And without those, they're never going to be engaged. And, you can talk about having these tools, but unless you're addressing those core things, and not from a technology perspective, just from a business operations perspective, you're not going to have an engaged workforce no matter how much money you spend on the tech.
Yeah.
Have you seen this go wrong?
I'm quite passionate about this too. I think the end of the article speaks a little bit about that we need to have, highly evolved models of sentiment analysis and stitching all our tools together. And you know what? Of course, we all want data to make better decisions. But I think if it's used as a crutch and saying, well, I don't have the data, I can't do the right thing today, then we're just thinking again about this the wrong way around. Look, we are all employees or have been employees. We all know what a good experience looks like or not. And I think you touched on this. What do people want? They want to be excited about the mission. They want to know they can bring their strengths to work. They want to know they're being challenged. They want the teammates to have their back. So we kind of know that already. I don't think anyone has to prove this out. And then if you look at why people leave the business, as you said, we spend a lot of time there at LHH. They typically say, exit interviews. Oh, money. Okay. Career opportunities. Guess what? Their leader. I joined a business and I'm leaving, my leader. And there it comes back to keep things simple. How do they lead? How can we humanize, this whole experience? And I think tech can be a double-edged sword in this. Yes, if it brings me and allows me to get the stuff off my plate that doesn't allow me to be more human because it takes my time, it's one thing. But if it takes that human piece out, I think you're at the danger. And I come back to keeping things simple. If you have good leaders who show up right every day, I think the experience can be profound, even if you don't have all the tech.
It's a good point. It reminded me of a piece of information I read a few years ago. I was talking about employee engagement surveys, which very popular tech. There's lots of them out there which try to understand and take that sentiment analysis. And I had read, and apparently this does hold up across multiple vendor platforms, that if you want to understand the sentiment of your employees and you survey them, if you survey them and 60% of your staff reply, you don't need to check the survey results because their engagement is going to be, guess what, 60%. If 40% reply, they're going to end up with 40% on anything you can ask them, any survey result. That actually the response rate of a survey is a proxy for employee engagement, a really strongly correlating proxy for employee engagement, which I thought was fascinating because you could spend all the money in the data analytics to understand the insights and behaviors. Whereas actually, turns out that your staff don't even want to do a survey. They aren't engaged. If everyone wants to complete the survey, guess what? They're an engaged workforce.
Because at the most basic level, it's about making sure people are being heard. But coming back to it, I'm not sure if you need technology for this. So that's where I think the balance comes in, and that's where I'm really passionate about, leadership and ensuring we can do this at a human-to-human level as well.
On that technology piece, I want to bring us to our second article this week I want to discuss with you. And this is from the World Economic Forum. And in this article, they talk about why skills, not degrees, will shape the future of work. Kristoff, first of all, I want to try and get your opinion on why is it that you think the world of employment the employers, the talent acquisition teams, the organizations have for so long used degrees as a standard when hiring, because it is a thing we all use. We look at someone's degree, let's say for professional jobs, or lack of degree. What do you think it is that employers are hiring managers are doing when they look at degrees today? What are they using that degree as a proxy for?
Look, it's an accreditation. It's a stamp. It's a stamp of approval, and I think that in itself is part of the problem. I mean, I've grown up in Germany, been educated there. I studied in the UK, and then moved here. I think it's crazy how a commercial position of potentially yourself or your parents allow stamp of approval getting into bigger and better university. I'm not sure how that all correlates to the underlying talent of someone. I think it also helps us justify our decisions, and is a mental shortcut. Someone with a certain background, I equal into having this. You could go broader than this and saying someone comes from a certain company, right? And this is where biases come into play. I think that's fine as long as it doesn't cut you out and saying someone who doesn't have that is not good, right? I think accreditation is important. I do think we had a danger of cutting really good people out of this. So how do we think about the middle, right? Who might not be able to make it in a top university, and how do we don't set them back commercially because it comes at a cost? After reading this, I kind of reminded myself that employers are kind of can drive a real big change in this. You probably come across this as well. Google recently launched career certificate courses, and specifically in data analysis, I think, project management, UX design. And they basically make that equivalent to a 4-year degree for the hiring process. And I mean, if an employer like this does it, they can have a huge impact. And I mean, I can give you some examples that we even have from within the group and through our Re and Upskilling Business GA, where we build programs where we can see and prove out that people, in academy programs, after kind of intensive onboarding and training, and then rotation programs perform over and above science grads, for example. So the problem in here is inherently that it leaves a big part of the population out, and I'm maybe speaking predominantly about the US, and I think that's a danger because what is our competitive advantage is the ability to innovate, and the diversity plays a huge role in this. So I do think governments, educational institutions, and businesses need to keep rethinking this model.
I think when I looked at this, what I was quite shocked, not surprised perhaps, but quite shocked by the differences that it highlighted about unemployment rates in this current pandemic and recession, and how it correlated with the education level you have, which highlights how much we still rely on degrees. A story, if you don't mind me sharing, of one of my best friends I grew up with. We worked together when we worked in pubs and nightclubs years and years ago, and he got a job as a sales rep in an FMCG company. And he never went to college, he never got a university degree, and so on and so forth. But he worked his way up. And he got to a point where he was doing extremely well, and he was asked to go on a leisure program. And it's a massive, big US multinational. And they told me I had to go on that because to get the certain level in the organization, you had to have a degree, and they were willing to pay for it. So they said they'd fund him to go to night school. And he turned up the first night and spent an hour and left. Just wasn't for him. Right? That schooling is just not really for him. And so they said, well, you can't progress. And he said, well, so be it. Right? That's just the way it is, right? So then, fast forward 10 years, he's now the managing director of their Irish organization. And, to me, it was proof that this idea you have to have a degree and it's the only way just isn't necessarily the only way to develop really, really great leaders or to develop anyone. And increasingly, what I'm seeing certainly is that employers are stepping in a world where, if we read correctly, the pace in which skills are changing, the need for skills is changing. The workforce is going so fast that universities can't even keep up with that. And employers are stepping in, and to your point, they're looking at their role in education. is really, 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 really important, because notwithstanding the fact that there's a lot of bias in perhaps the university approach, and not everyone can have those opportunities. It just isn't fast enough. Waiting 4 years for someone to come out of a computer science degree is crazy. I loved that Google example when they said, I think for something like $50 or $100 you can pay, and you do the course, and if you pass, they're saying, we'll hire you as an equivalent for your computer science grad if you complete this online course. That's amazing, that innovation where they're essentially creating the supply in the market, which is a really different way of approaching talent. You said you might have some examples. I'd love to hear, Kristoff, of the more innovative ways you've seen organizations approach talent supply issues.
One that comes immediately to mind, which I really love, is it's a story about Disney and their need to have more coders and people who have the ability to work as engineers, and they specifically want female engineers, and want to make sure they come from a diverse background. And they did build together with us, and this is the General Assembly part of the group, a sister company, Pontoon, something called Code Rosie, code standing for creating opportunities for diverse engineers. And they basically take non-technical women within the Disney organization, allow them to go through a 3 months immersive program focused on coding and analytic skills, and then through a year-long apprenticeship, which was 2 6 months, split into 6 months, and then really move into a tech job in the group. Not only did the program have a fantastic net promoter score and people raved about it because they felt valued, it made a business impact. And guess what? It helps the Disney business and the employer brand. It's just so many wins all around. Plus, they couldn't find that talent externally. We'll talk a little bit more, hopefully, about that later. But this whole idea about not thinking about talent as replaceable, but that we can renew them, I think is really, really important and powerful. And equally, you could think about building these academies at the front end and hiring externally. Yet, coming back to your point at the beginning, we're always looking for that 10 out of 10, people who fit all the boxes. And I think I listened to a previous podcast of yours where you shared the story that doesn't necessarily even correlate to success of the person, right? Hitting all those boxes. So I love that story because it hits me at something that's really important, again, the purpose and diversity aspect of making sure that everyone has equal opportunities and that we bring out the best in people. And imagine this experience and how they talk about the business now and how sticky that is versus someone maybe even brought in differently.
It's a fantastic story. We've Jerry Crispin joining us live, listening in, saying where the degree is taken is too often a privileged bias, excluding those with skills. Great to have you, Jerry, on the show. I 100% agree with you. It is a challenge, but I think that's where we're seeing, maybe this is where technology, Kristoff, comes actually into play and becomes a real asset. I think organizations are much better able to assess for the true skills and potential that people need. And maybe they would have used a 4-year degree as a proxy for some of those skills or attributes. We're actually much better at testing for those things now. The technology's got better, the tests have got better. And therefore, if you know that somebody has the skills and knowledge, then you don't need a third level educational body to certify them that maybe you have to spend $100,000 a year to go to. You can assess that really, really quickly. And you don't care who has that background. I tell a story a lot of a friend of mine, Dan, who used to run talent acquisition for EY in UK and Ireland. And Dan was the first in the EY group. I'm just mentioning the original firm who wrote that first article, whereby he pushed for the UK and Ireland to allow individuals to be considered who passed a test that EY came up with, regardless of their background, experience, age, education. They said, well, we know we have a numeracy test and we have other tests that we want to run. And of course, like most big four firms, they had used GPA average or, a certain level of degree in a certain type of university as the bar that you had to pass to get an interview at EY. He, 4 or 5 years ago, moved them to a situation whereby sit the test, you get an interview. don't care where you've come from, whether you've ever been in a college or a school, if you can pass this test, you've proven yourself on the abilities we're looking for. Now we'll move you into an interview. And the next year, the first year of this, they had an increase in diversity of something like 28%. Of the intake was from areas that would have never got through the previous process. And they were the highest rated group ever in the history of EY in UK and Ireland coming into it. Like evidence that if you just build a decent enough assessment process, you can scrap requirements like degrees and move on to just testing for skills. And you go one step further, which is how do we build those skills? I think the Disney example is fantastic at how you can go build those skills. Kristoff, I wonder if I can ask you another question around talent beyond acquisition. Are you seeing, particularly in the world of COVID, where we're seeing such rapid shifts in, industries that were booming, all of a sudden dead or quiet, industries that were stable, all of a sudden in need of talent? Have you seen any good examples where, companies or organizations have been innovative around that supply of talent to solve problems?
Yeah. Again, another area I'm super passionate about. I think COVID generally acts as an accelerator. Certainly brought to the forefront a trend that I have experienced now sitting on the LHH side for the last 10 years, where, as you said, we have been involved kind of the restructuring side of business heavily. And what we've seen there over the last 10 years is that dramatically the reasons why companies restructure has shifted from capacity issues. We need to reduce our staff by 400 here because we're moving them somewhere here, or our business goes down to a skill mix issue, which is turn out the right people. What also matters, a company, if they let 1,000 people go, they were also hiring another 1,200. And I always struck me as the waste of money's being spent at the front end of the talent acquisition process, so hard to find. And then even bigger, the waste on the back end of the talent life cycle. When you think it might be easier to restructure because you have a different legislative requirements in the US, but in Europe, the amount of money and process step it takes to do that. And so I don't find a good run business doesn't scream for more and better talent. So we have struggled with this idea of how can we get business to think across this issue more broadly than in their silos. And when COVID came, it really, really accelerated the issue because it has even further shown who is growing and who is kind of going down. And it's a tragedy to see so many people falling on the street and losing their jobs. And you've seen companies step in, I think it was Accenture and Verizon, to build these talent exchanges, right? Where that I think is very difficult if it doesn't get scoped right to make it happen. So what we have been able to do, and this is what I told you is kind of an exciting place to be, is that we can be an architect of this whole ecosystem. Is that there's so many companies that we know that have a talent surplus in the current environment, but people that actually do not want to lose and potentially want to make sure that they keep them, but from a commercial perspective are driven to actually releasing them because it will hurt their bottom line. On the other hand, there's so many companies who have a high talent demand. How can we stitch these together in a creative way? One of the pieces of work we've done in Germany actually is between Lufthansa and Amazon, where the Lufthansa catering business specifically had a kind of an oversupply surplus about 6,000 people. People, highly skilled, committed to the company, which under the German government funding were able to get support for a certain amount of time. But that support running out means that the payroll of the business in a time when there's less flights is severely impacted, and Amazon couldn't meet the demand spikes. So what we were able to do is create this gearbox, as I would call it, to make the connection between those two businesses and facilitate the processes. Everything from kind of matching employees' profiles with the demands and needs through technology and people, by supporting, this is really important, especially in Germany, supporting these individuals through the decision-making process, because it's voluntary engagement by the employee, which would, again, a skill set that we have in the group, making sure this meets data protection and works council expectations, and then really ensuring that there's also a legally compliant solutions, part of the Adecco group, through a temp agency, making sure that the people can move and have a double-sided contract, and offering upskilling, reskilling at the end of their temporary assignment. They come back, which means it's a win for Lufthansa. They get these people for a certain amount of time off their books. It reduces the pressure they have commercially. It allows them to get them back, and hopefully, the world goes back to normal. Win for Amazon, great talent in the short time, and they don't have to lay them off, because if they hire perm, you don't have to lay them off. And win for the employees, because someone is, guess what? We can't guarantee you a career for life, but I can guarantee you that I'll look after your lifetime career. And that mindset shift is a really important one. And so Amazon is one example. We call it the employment bridge. With diving into many, coincidentally, automotive firms who have already been disrupted, right? In terms of combustion to e cars, right? And in terms of the supply chains. And so I see some really, COVID has been the mother of all trigger events. When everything is going well, no one wants to really challenge the status quo. Now companies are ready for it. So what I've seen, that these ideas have existed beforehand, but where a CFO said beforehand, wait, I'm going to spend the $1 billion on restructuring because that actually helps. It's crazy, but helps my stock price potentially. People are now saying, what if you reinvest that money differently, and don't look at and look at spending that into the employee of sector to get a much better outcome. And I have I'm very passionate about this. That kind of wall that still exists. If we can break that, we can unlock so much for talent, which goes beyond acquisition. So I know this was a lot, but this is an area I think we have so many opportunities together.
I agree, and I think there's more and more companies every day waking up to this reality and looking even internally at the way that they organize their talent teams, and looking at those silos that traditionally existed between talent acquisition, talent development, internal mobility, diversity, inclusion, and saying, hang on a second, we need a more joined up approach. We need to your point, move beyond just the acquisition approach, where you go to the talent acquisition leader and you say, we need to hire 200,000 people next year. Instead, you go, we need 200,000 people to have slightly different skills in different places next year. Maybe we're going to hire some external people. Maybe we can retrain. Maybe we can do some graduate work. Maybe we can move people around. Maybe we can borrow some staff. Maybe we can lend out some staff. It's kind of going, the business doesn't actually want you to hire. The business just wants the people with the skills to be in place. And of course, to your point, if the CFO is coming in, she's looking at this, she's like, hang on a second, acquisition is really expensive. Can we look at a different way of doing this? And I think, you made a point to me recently, you're sharing a story, Kristoff, and I'll begin it. Maybe you can finish it because I'll do it badly. When you were talking to one of your existing customers in Pontoon, and this was a company in the healthcare sector. And, the conversation isn't about we need to hire X. The conversation was the output that they need to give to market. And that's the problem you're solving. Maybe you can share that better than I have.
For them, it's purely, look, we need to, as a pharma company, if you think the situation we're in, especially, the flu season come up, we need to deliver flu. We need to deliver vaccines. And quite frankly, from a business perspective, we don't care how. We need the talent to do so, different channels to make this happen. And so we need to, and I think this is also the barrier to why not many companies doing this. We don't talking about the business outcome. This brings us back all the way to the tech discussion, right? When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's what it looks like if you have very strong siloed talent functions, right? An employee relations team and that works with finance, will think about how do I spend the money most efficiently on restructuring, and the talent acquisition teams, how do I think most efficiently on bringing these people in? Yes, they want to maximize their own function, but I think if we can, we all talk about this, if we as providers in internal talent functions find ways to truly influence the business, being consultative, help them build a business case, and and this is where I'm biased, of course, and one of the reasons I think it does happen, and find a partner who can actually make these things happen with you, because otherwise this can be very disjointed, and who has the ability to run this life cycle. Yeah, you can put something, down that a CFO says, you know what, I'm buying into this because I can see a business impact, and a business leader the same thing. And I think if we start talking that language, we can remove some of those barriers. Because right now, and this is the positive about COVID, again, the status quo is dead. People are open to new things, and we need to jump into that. We've all talked about a seat at the table. Well, we better take it now.
Yeah, I think, when you look at whether you're on a vendor side, or whether you're a provider, or whether you're internal talent acquisition, I think now is the time to look and say, what problem am I actually solving for here? And disregard okay, I used to always do it this way. My way of solving was to find talent. Okay, great, that's fantastic, but maybe that's not the way to do it going forward. And to your point, like if I'm a big fan of podcasts, as I know you are as well, Kristoff. And a lot of the business podcasts I've listened to lately are all pointing back to 2008 and how much innovation came out of 2008, the Great Recession. It gave us brand new businesses, brand new sectors that are doing really well today. The pioneer businesses we admire today, they nearly all came out of that 2008 period. Because that's what happens when you have a time like this, a rare time where the market gets slammed so hard with something so unique that new solutions are possible. People stop and go, we can think of new ways of doing it. It's okay to take a risk. Maybe your business is so slammed that you go, let's take a risk and do something else. I know some of the staffing agencies out there that I talk to, they've taken a real hit Q2, Q3. And if you're ever going to rethink your business, now's the time to do it. But also talent acquisition teams that were told no hiring for 3 or 6 months. If you're going to rethink how you do it, and we've had some guests on the show in the last few months, Kristoff, talking about how talent acquisition teams have been asked to take over internal mobility in a new way. And partly I was kind of like, do they not do that already? Like, surely that's what they do. And it turns out they don't. Most of them don't look after that. So even those small wins where it's still hiring, but it's just internal hiring, you're starting to see a more joined up approach. I guess for you, Kristoff, this is hopefully a great opportunity for you to really think about, the as you mentioned, the wider group and the way that the group maybe has leveraged technology products, different business offerings to really have a more joined up approach. If you're thinking about the actual leaders within business, within talent teams, what would your advice be in terms of, from what you've seen that works? If you're a talent acquisition leader or former talent acquisition leader who maybe is either fighting to have a wider remit or has just been given a wider remit, what advice or insight could you provide to someone like that?
That's a difficult question to answer. I'd come back to first principle. I mean, I think having worked both as a functional COE leader in my career and kind of a P&L leader, I think the danger is as a functional leader, we're looking to optimize for potentially for a siloed outcome. And I think having the empathy to really understand what drives the business, who is really the customer, and how can we achieve that is a key aspect of making the understanding what the outcome needs to look like, and then working together broader across the spectrum. Might be the talent organization, but also the finance organization and others who can together get to that outcome. This idea from Simon Sinek, whether you play the finite or the infinite game, right? And I think we need to think about it this way, because it might not just be that we need to solve this through in our own four walls, right? And I'm not only talking then, bringing in other partners and vendors, but how can we think about talent across the industry? How can we share this? And I think the winners in the future are the ones who break down those silos, maybe come with a different perspective. I think we coming into the the more pure talent acquisition space now, I can tell you as a little bit of an outsider, it's full of acronyms. It's hard to understand. It is very technical. And it's, I see myself more as a general kind of business leader. It's sometimes hard to engage. And I think we need to look at ourselves here and say, how can we, get out of our own way here, and be closer to what matters, first principles about the business. And long-winded answer. That's kind of my view today.
I think you're right. When I've talked to any leaders who've been successful or begun to be successful, it's through close collaboration in their own organizations across the different functions. I think your point is echoed by Jerry Christman's comments, who's talking about how we need to come together as a collection of vendors, employers, consultants to try and promote best practice and share that. I think that's so true. I know Jerry's been trying to do that for years, and has had success in trying to do that as well through colloquium and other ways. But it's definitely something that I think I would echo that your sentiment there, Kristoff, which is that it isn't something that any one of us or one part of the talent landscape can solve. It really has to be more joined up, whether you're seeing that from inside your own business as a talent acquisition professional in a private company, or you're seeing it as somebody who's in the ecosystem, maybe as a vendor, partner, technology provider. It is kind of how do you join those things together? Back to the tech piece. Tech is great, fantastic if it's serving a purpose, to our first article. But really you have to look at what is the challenge of the business, what is the challenge of the employee, and I think listen to them more than anything else. That's what I'm hearing from you. And I think it is a great perspective to come in, Kristoff, that you aren't, I suppose, weighed down with the baggage of only having worked in recruiting or talent acquisition all of your career, that you've seen many different aspects of the employee life cycle and the business challenges that organizations have. I think that's that kind of that Medici effect, where you've seen how other people think, how different parts of the business think, how solutions can come together, will hopefully serve you really well.
Yeah, and on this level, I mean, I said that let's be frank, they would have found someone with more experience running an MSP or an RPO business, right? But I think this should tell you something around, well, so where we want to go. It's how can we be more impactful business partners? So my view is that I need to co-create the future of our business also together with others. And that's not just in the spectrum of who we are within the group. Johnny, you've been great at introducing me to people who I could call my competitors or call clients. And I believe in, building in public and co-creating, because ultimately I think we can increase the pie here. I believe in this infinite game more probably than the finite. We all want to win, we're all competitive, but there's so many problems out there to solve for us as talent and talent acquisition leaders. It's quite clear that there's a ton of growth if we think about this together.
Thanks. For those of you who haven't already heard it, Simon Sinek's talk, which I believe is going to be a future book on the infinite game versus the finite game, is fascinating. I remember watching it on YouTube a year ago, trying to board a plane, and then kind of wanting the plane to slow down, not take off, so I can finish the talk. It's fantastic. It's both a history lesson, but also a perspective to think about when you look at this. So those of you who haven't seen it, Sinek, the Infinite Game, Google that, watch the YouTube video talk. It's fascinating. I think you'll very much appreciate Kristoff's perspective after checking that out.
And the book is out, Johnny.
Oh, it's out.
I'll send it to you.
Awesome. All right, so I've got more new reading to keep me up at night, Kristoff. I appreciate that. Would you believe at time? And that time, Kristoff, is the end of the show when we ask our guests to please leave us with advice for our audience. For our audience, I'd love if you can maybe think of advice that perhaps you have been given in your career, or you perhaps have to offer from that broad background that you'd like to leave our audience with here today.
Yeah, and this is something very personal, but it speaks to experience as well. I started this job 6 weeks ago. There's about 2,000 people in Pontoon. At this point, I have not met anyone in person. I have not who works at Pontoon, I've met in person. Throughout the recruitment process, the same thing. So as a leader coming into the business, you think, and I'm not the only one who's in that situation, of course, right? I think, how do you build a human-to-human relationship and create some sort of experience with these people? And so this is very tactical, but I think it's a moment that matters. Like, what is my first introduction? Are people going to think, is this guy going to be good for me or bad for me? So I made a point. It kind of happened, but I think it had, would be a tip I'd share, is for everyone that connected with me on LinkedIn for the organization, I made a point to reply to everyone on LinkedIn, just 30-second, 45-second video. Hey, Johnny, thanks for connecting with me on LinkedIn. Looking forward to working with you. I just saw this about in your profile, and the amount of goodwill this created, the amount of, energy before I even started, and how it enabled me to create a little moment that mattered. And quite frankly, made it easy for me now to do my job. Was incredible. So I would, encourage people to think about how they continue to, focus on those moments that matter, even in the world, that's so virtual now, because I think we can still humanize yourself if you now come back to tech, if you use things like video, and it just had a huge impact. So that's a very personal one. Hopefully it helps others too.
It's an amazing tip. Something I haven't been doing, but now the technology is available on LinkedIn, I'm going to be video messaging reply to connections to create those moments. It's a brilliant piece of advice, Kristoff. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining us. I know you've been overwhelmed, in a new job, a lot to do. I'm really excited to see what happens next with Pontoon. What someone like yourself can do in the job with an already fantastic business. What's going to happen next, I think, is going to be fascinating, and hopefully adds value and as you say, grows that pie. So, Kristoff, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate that. And we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you so much, Jenny.
So that brings me on to what's coming up next on the shortlist. So as always, we want to try and bring you the best guests, and we have one of our own next week, one of our own partners, the fantastic Jose Cadillac, who I met, 5-6 years ago at a sourcing event in Europe, is going to be joining me on the show next week. Jose hails from the Czech Republic. He lives in Prague today and is extremely well known across Central and Eastern European as being the sourcing expert. We're delighted to kind of let you all know that he's joined the SocialTalent platform as our resident advisor on all things sourcing and trainer on all things sourcing. But Jose also runs his own kind of training business in the Czech Republic. He runs an RPO business that supplies sourcing services to many big blue chip companies across the world, with several hundred recruiters and sourcers working for him as well, and also runs a recruiting technology company, an ATS provider. This man literally has an enormous amount of energy, so it literally has his fingers in training, in service provision, in technology within our industry, and is just always out there trying to help the community. Teaching us hopefully some new advanced sourcing techniques and what's happening in the world of sourcing. Jose will join us next Wednesday, the 21st of October at 4 p.m. UK Ireland time, which don't forget is 11 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States. That's 8 a.m. if you're on the West Coast, or 11 p.m. if you're in Singapore and parts of Asia. So do check that out. If you can't make that time, as always, you can go to socialtalent.com/the shortlist. You can get a link to our podcast on Apple or Spotify or wherever you might be listening to this show. And you can find all the recordings from the show there or on our YouTube channel as well. Really hope you enjoyed the conversation today. I hope that Kristoff's insights and unique background have given you some food for thought as to what is next for the wider world of talent acquisition, beyond acquisition, and into that bigger sphere of talent. Hope you enjoyed the show. I'll catch you next week.